Oh, you have a question you want to answer?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So the question is, got notes here because I want to be prepared and not just wing it. So I said last week I'd answer this. So the question is, I think this came in from the same person that asked about assurance. The NRC and RCNA churches in Chilliwack are such a mystery to other people who don't attend. Can you shed a light on what it's actually like? I've heard there's a stop light at the entrance of the church to let regular attendees choose their seat before visitors, or the rigidness and, for lack of better word, doom of their sermons, lack of grace and hope. Okay. Ready for this?
It's not for me. I mean, I gave you the whole analogy.
But I want you can interrupt and ask questions, clarifying questions.
Okay, I'll give my thoughts after.
Okay. So I first want to say I'm somewhat reluctant to answer the question because it's only based on my perspective, right? So every person's perspective is different.
Yeah, and I always struggle with descriptions of bodies because I always feel like it's stereotypes and paintbrushing, and I feel it's just really dangerous.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So my perspective is being based on being in the NRC until I was 30, and my dad being a pastor in the NRC for over 30 years.
Yeah.
So I know it can easily be taken, like a question like this can be taken as me like NRC bashing NRC, which I've been accused of, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I think we need to separate disagreeing with what is taught versus and what people are believing versus bashing. Like for example, growing up, I was taught really clearly how the Roman Catholic Church was wrong, or how the evangelical churches are wrong. Like it's not. I think we can just clarify on what we believe, what we don't believe, and what's different. But that we can separate that from criticizing people. So that's the perspective I come from. So like I have lots of family and friends who are members of the NRC and RCNA that I love, and so I'm just like, it's not personal or anything. But first of all, I thought I'd give a brief history of these churches for anyone who's listening who doesn't understand any context.
Oh, I'm interested to hear the history.
Okay.
This came up just the other day.
Of the NRC and the RCNA
started.
Okay,
interesting.
So the NRC started in 1907 by Reverend Kirsten, who brought a bunch of churches together and started the denomination. 1907.
Was it a split from another church?
No, it was a joining of a bunch of churches.
Oh, cool.
Something with the Lady Board in churches or something, I think, if I remember correctly.
Okay, cool.
And cool story, the house that he lived in, he could see a village across another village from his window or whatever.
Okay.
And that was one of the churches he joined. And that I was born in that house in Meliscattica in Zeeland. Which is called Sealand, basically. So
what was his motivation for bringing all these, and what types of churches were they, or you don't know?
I don't know the details of that now.
Yeah.
Oh, I think their details were on there, but I didn't want to keep it that long. But interesting guy, though. He even started an NRC political party, which believed still exists today.
Okay.
And he was elected to Parliament in 1922. Okay. And he would, and this is the Dutch Parliament, he would remain in Parliament until he was banned in 1945.
So that would have been right after the war he was banned.
Yes. So this was because during World War II, Kirsten denounced resistance against the Nazis, claiming the occupation of the Netherlands was a deserved divine punishment for people not keeping the Sunday holy.
This guy was serious about the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was very serious about it. That was a big sin, I guess.
Where did you pull this info from?
Online. It's on the history pages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kirsten also refused to sign a 1941 protest of the Covenant of Dutch Churches against the persecution of Jews during the war. So that's why after the war, a government committee barred him from returning to Parliament because he didn't support the Jews. So that's how it started. In 1953, the NRC had a church split, and that's where the NRC denomination came in.
Can I interrupt with a very completely unrelated but interesting aside? So I got these round balers in from Austria.
This is totally
aside. It just made me think of it. So we're hanging out with these Austrian guys, one American guy that grew up in Illinois, and the guy who's complete Austrian. I don't know if I said this last week in the podcast, that they have a house, like his grandparents' house was built in 1654 or something crazy. Anyways, there is a family, and I wish I knew what it was now, but there is a family in Austria that is banned from being in political office of any kind. Ever.
Oh,
for life. It's in the Constitution.
Wow.
And it's because that over the years, and I mean, he had a whole example. The American could articulate it really well. He knew his wife's Austrian. He's American. He knew a lot about Austrian history. Anyways, he basically said that this family, if you went back in the 50 years or 100 years ago, or 150 years ago, all the kings, the king of Spain, the king of the Netherlands, all these kings were all from this one family.
Oh.
And so they were so wealthy and they controlled so much of the world that they just decided that, hey, these people cannot be in control. Where the whole anybody in their
family
extended family's banned. Anyways, it was just very fascinating that, like, So we think in our society where we look at like these weird things that happen where, you know, we just arbitrarily decide things. I mean, they decided enough people agreed with that at one point where they're like, hey, these people
democracy is only great when you're the majority.
That's a great quote right there. Sorry. Back to the history of the Netherlands Reformed Congregation. Sorry.
Yeah. So, how did the RCNA get involved? So in 1953, the NRC had a church split, and that's where the RCNA denomination started. And it was because a student in theological school named C. Stoneblock, I guess it is in English, was dismissed from the theological seminary of the NRC because he taught that God does not offer grace to all sinners, but only those persons who are elect and acknowledge their sins. Which I think is still the difference today between NRC and RCNA. I'm not 100% sure because I think there's I don't know. So, but the North American NRC churches had already started at that time, mainly because families escaping the ruins of World War II, so like in the 1940s, and also escaping the big flood in 1953 when a dike broke in Holland and flooded a whole big part of Holland. That was the year my dad was born. I think anybody knows Mr. Koyman, like he was a local farmer here.
Yeah.
His family still farms. He was in that flood, actually. I think he lost a brother in that flood. Yeah, that was 1953. So a lot of farmers came to.
Did the split not happen initially in Ontario? Or did it happen in Holland?
Happened in Holland.
Okay, somebody told me the other day. It's okay, fair enough.
So in 1967, the Chilliwack NRC were split with members of leaving to form the RCNA in Chilliwack.
Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't get into details of that. So just some stats. So in Holland right now, the RCNA has about 50 churches, 25,000 members, and 9 pastors. That's just in Holland. And then the NRC has 107,000 members in Holland, 150 churches, and 66 pastors.
Okay, it's huge in the Netherlands, eh? Just don't realize that.
And it's 3 to 1 pastor ratio. So for every 3 churches, only 1 is a pastor.
Those guys work hard.
Yeah.
They work hard.
Yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah. That is actually, so that was one of the we've had conversations about this topic this week I have with other people, and it ties into even, and somebody said it really bluntly, I don't know if it's a fair assessment, but it was just the idea that there'd be people that would feel called to preach or called to lead. And then other people would say, you're not called. Now, granted, I mean, even I would agree with the idea of discernment in people, but it's just like when you look at a body of people where there's 1,000 or 2,000 people or whatever, 1,000 people, you know, you look back to the Old Testament, the New Testament, I'm thinking, hey, there needs to be more than 3 leaders. I just don't see how you can't, you know, it just seems concerning to me where it's like even just a workload and the idea of like true discernment, you would want to have
full time, not like this is a side gig.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying that in total, right? Yeah. Even with because
otherwise
the amount of workload, I feel so sorry for these men, how much weight they carry, right? And there again, I mean, obviously, it's I don't understand the inner workings. I just think healthy leadership is super important anywhere, right? And the church is probably the most important. So,
So in North America, the RCNA has 4 or 5 churches. I couldn't clarify that, and about 2,000 members. So that's in all of North America, Canada, and U.S. And the NRC has about 11,000 members in Canada and U.S., 30 churches and 12 pastors. So roughly the same
2 to
ratio.
1.
Yeah, 2 to 1 ratio. So, okay, so that's just some history. I thought I'd give people some context of what we're talking about here because a lot of people don't know because they are actually quite small.
I would stop there.
So, I know you would. I will answer any question. I'm not scared to answer. I'll give my honest opinion. It's not.
It's just your opinion. Fair enough.
It's just I'm trying to be real and So the question again was that NRC and RCNA churches in Chilliwack are such a mystery to other people who don't attend. Can you shed a light on what it's actually like? I've heard there's a stoplight at the entrance of the church to let regular attendees choose their seat before visitors, or the religiousness and, for lack of better words, doom of their sermons, lack of grace and hope. Okay, so the stoplight, I asked around a little bit, asked opinions for some people. It's a real thing in some NRC and RCNA churches. It's quite small. It's like the size of a toonie or something else like that. And it's a red light at the back of church when that's on, and visitors need to wait to get their seat so regular attendees can get their seats first. And a few minutes before the service starts, it will turn off, so the visitors can also get a seat. I've seen this myself a few times. So this happens in some of those churches. So that's just fact. Do with that information what you will. The other part of the question is also important to note there can be significant differences between one NRC to the next. So the NRC in Chilliwack, where I grew up, for example, was considered one of the more liberal NRC churches in North America.
I hate that term.
But that's
Sorry.
how it was talked about growing up for me. It was one of the more liberal ones.
Actually, is that the
Yeah.
term that people use?
Yeah. And my dad was actually not welcome to preach in some NRC churches because of that. And interestingly enough, the Chilliwack church apparently would be considered more middle of the road among NRC churches if it were in Holland. And
Okay.
I don't even know how you really measure that. Usually it's in outward things, or sometimes they're preaching the gospel. But
I mean, would preaching the gospel be considered liberal?
yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So shedding a light on what it's actually like is harder for me, but it's not so much their doom and gloom of their sermons, in my experience. Because in my experience, sin wasn't preached that much. But
It wasn't?
No. And I'll clarify that. But the gospel was not preached much either. It was preached, but not much in my perspective. So my experience was more a big sense of apathy. And what I mean is that sin was not preached that much. Is that our greatest sin, which is not believing in Jesus, was not taught or talked about very much. Like, it was normal to be unsaved. Like, our rejection of Christ is ultimately what we're going to get sent to hell for, right? Yeah. That is the biggest sin in our hearts. And so that wasn't considered really a sin. It was normal to be unsaved.
So can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
So that is what I have found fascinating as I like objectively read scripture now, especially like reading through the New Testament, and you read all the letters from Paul and all the other chapters. I always find it fascinating that, based in there again, I mean, I'm a dumb farmer reading the Bible, but like, it looks to me and it feels to me like the word is written to the believers.
Yeah.
Like not all of it.
Yeah.
There's harsh, and there's serious warnings, like, search out your salvation with fear and trembling, and all these, and just warnings of being unsaved in hell, and is real. But just this idea of like, just you read these letters, and like they're preaching as if everybody's in the church is basically saved. Right. And so that was very counter to kind of my beliefs as a kid, right? Where it's like, okay, the whole,
so all the forms I grew up with in church as well, they were all written to believers as well. Like the baptism form starts with beloved in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So what I would say, and this is where I don't know, like they're going to be very interesting. You could find a guest on who's way older, who knows, maybe even your dad or somebody like that, who really knows this history well.
Yeah, I would love to have an elder or a pastor on from one of these churches.
Yeah, like somebody that could really delve in the history. But I'm guessing that a lot of things, because this is what happens with everything, and it happens in every church and every denomination. It happens with
telephone.
The telephone.
Oh, you like pass information off one person next, and it changes.
Well, just the heart, where you end up is often different from the heart of what started it, right? Like if you think of the Reformation, or if you think of some of these things that were like, if you think of Martin Luther, and if you start to read what Martin Luther taught, and you think of, hey, that's where we were coming from.
Yeah. So
it doesn't necessarily line up well at times, right? And that's human. That's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
It's going to happen with anything. But.
Yeah. So like I said, the majority of the members would say they're not saved, but still, you could still become a church member and not be saved. You could still baptize your kids and not be saved. You could that would be controversial. Yeah. You could become an elder or deacon and not be saved.
That would be very controversial, would it not?
It was, I don't agree with that. Like, I think you need to be saved to baptize your kids. I think you'd be saved to be a member. I think you'd be saved to be like, otherwise your Romans 3 says your heart's like an open grave. Like, you have no use for God at all if you're an unbeliever, right? So if you hate God and don't follow Christ, like it's black or white, then it doesn't.
Okay. Yeah.
So there was a lot more emphasis on some outward rules on how you dressed or what you did on Sundays.
There again, that would be very different
depending on who you talk to. Exactly. Yeah. So my belief is the gospel is not clearly preached due to tendencies towards hyper-Calvinism that emphasize the fact that being saved is a one-sided work of God. I was taught there is nothing we can do ourselves to be saved. And I would sit in church waiting for God to save me and thinking I wanted to be saved, but waiting for God to do it. And so I didn't feel that responsible. So I was guilt-free to an extent, right? Because I'm like, I can't do anything to be saved.
I don't think that was actually taught though, eh?
No, I don't think that was taught either. Like you were told to use the means to read the Bible and to pray. Yeah. But often when the gospel was offered in a sermon, right afterwards, it would be, but you can't do it yourself. And so it's like, the interesting thing is if you look up the Canons of Dort, the third and fourth head of doctrine, Article 12, for anybody that wants to geek out.
Well, it's just...
Yeah, it's in the back.
There's lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah,
it's just
the Canons of Dort is a beautiful document.
Yeah. There again, those were all things that were written from a place of like, hey, we need to hang on to our core doctrines.
Exactly.
They matter, right? And do matter.
That's right.
So
it says in there that we actually believe, which how it wrote. Yeah, you need to look it up to fully piece. But it's kind of interesting though that it reminds me of an RCNA friend actually told me one time that very conservative churches and very liberal churches, in a lot of ways are the same, because in the more quite liberal churches, there's a lot of emphasis on helping the poor and mission work and helping other people, and that can become your Christ, right? It can become your gospel, your thing that makes you feel right with God because you're doing all these good things. And in very conservative churches, like if you look at the Amish or the Mennonites or other conservative places, there's often a huge emphasis on,
or just legalistic places would be a better way to describe it.
Outward things, but then that becomes your thing that makes you get right with God again.
Better. Yeah.
And we know that of course is not how we get right with God. So the doom and gloom I observed was more prevalent actually among the 10 or 20% of the members that profess to be saved. And some reasons for this are that it was explicitly stated that if you were certain you were saved, that in itself was already a sign that you likely were not saved. Rather, if you doubted, that was a good sign.
Even in the NRC?
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think all of this combined causes people to look inward for so-called proof of whether they're saved or not. And I can tell you for a fact that's not a place where to look for hope or salvation, at least in my case.
Yeah, that's a good word there, Kyle. I would agree. That's a good word.
Because if we're honest with ourselves, inside it's just sin. Like, if anybody knows my whole story, it's not a pretty one.
Anybody's story.
Yeah.
Even people that look pretty good, right? And I think that's where people do struggle, is because and I think that's even interesting in those places where it's like, hey, people their lives aren't carnage, right? And a lot of people do a lot of the right things, right? But we're all hopelessly lost on our own, right?
That's right. Well, pride is a killer too, right? Yeah. So it's outside of ourselves, looking to Christ, where we can have real hope. And the interesting thing is, when I think I got saved at 21, I started reading what was called the Forefathers, because I was taught growing up that was what a good saved person would do. And they were guys like John Calvin, Martin Luther, J.C. Ryle, Almost O'Brackle, and they wrote was so much different than what I was preached or was taught. And so, but that's where the Reformation started with those guys, and they wrote a lot of these creeds as well and things we use today. And so, yeah. Now, I do want to say positives as well, because I think there was a lot of good things what I grew up with. For example, when my daughter Grace died, I had meals every day for 2 months, 2 or 3 months. Like it was awesome. I started prayer groups in the NRC. I was asked by leadership to participate in prison ministry and Mexican ministry, like really cool opportunities. I helped start a youth group for men. I started leading it. Got a lot of like really good work opportunities through the community and chances I probably otherwise wouldn't have had. And so, it's not all bad either. I think it's really important for people that are listening that like to differentiate. Hey, yes, I disagree with what is taught or what I think was taught in my experience, and I have different beliefs, but it doesn't make it a personal thing. Like I think we can separate that.
A lot of the teaching too. This is just my kind of view of kind of how I hear it now, like, and have felt like even for our kids have gone to the preschool and stuff, we felt extremely blessed there, because it is like just for some of the reasons you're saying, but just the idea of like sound theology and very caring people. But I feel like a lot of when we tend to gravitate, like everything that you're taught, like anything that we're taught, and this is just not about faith stuff or religion or whatever, theology, this is like in anything, you can always gravitate towards a ditch, right? You got the road and you have the ditches, right? And so wisdom is always needed and balance is needed. And I think that,
and also knowing what you believe, because
but I think I guess where I'm going with that is a lot of times when I hear something being said, by a leader or a pastor, and I'm kind of like, well, wow, okay, I don't agree with how you said that, or that doesn't feel totally, if I'm reading all of scripture, that's not where I would land with that statement. A lot of times it just comes from the fear of what the other side is. And I was taught that to some degree. And there again, I feel like even if I look at, like my parents are very different people now than they were when I was growing up, and their faith journey, they've changed a lot and really grown. But it's just this idea of like, hey, how are you, like, if you are worried about something negative happening, you're reacting. And then like, okay, what are we talking about? Right. And there's this fear. And I think like, if you look at that's something that I even struggle with my kids. I've shared it on here, but I've just shared it even recently. Like if you just worry about, hey, where are they going to end up? Well, I got to control, I got to harp on this. Like, at the end of the day, like they're the Lord's children. I need to have faith. I need to pray for them. I need to speak truth to them.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely not going to be straight arming them into like just doing all the right things. And even I'll get it wrong sometimes. So it's probably better if they don't they just need to learn to trust God themselves and seek his will for their life on their own. That's really what I should be trying to teach them. Right. And I feel like growing up, sometimes that wasn't the case because it was way more about behavior modification than heart transformation at times. Because there again, back to what you said, this idea of like, hey, obviously we can't do any heart transformation ourselves. That's God's job, not ours. But it was like, you couldn't even pray that authentically. If you did, you had to question that. And there again, there people would land in all different areas on that point.
Yeah.
So I'm always a little leery to be like, you want to be careful. There's obviously people that are wrestling with that question themselves, even at the church they're at, and are just longing to hear more. Hey, just like read the Bible, right? Like,
and also for questions to get answered. Like if I ask you, for example, hey, what's the best tractor you can buy? And you say go wheel, or best round baler you can buy. And you say go wheel round balers. And you just say, I say, why? You're like, well, because my dad used it, my grandpa used it, and that's just what we do. And that's the best one.
That's not a great reason.
And I'll be like,
that's
okay,
not going to cut it.
No, like I want to know why. Like, why do you believe this? What evidence do you have for what you believe? And if we don't give those answers to people, or people that have questions, then you're not going to get them to believe it because you don't really believe it. Right. And so I think that's true with your faith as well. If you can articulate it and you're fearful, well, that really,
the Bible tells us that we're supposed to be able to give an reason for the hope that we have. Right?
Yeah.
But there again, I think if you have a culture of unsaved people that are doing really good things, it creates a really dangerous culture. And that's kind of been my experience. The idea of like, boy, the 3 camp thing, I've talked about it on here a bit. And it's everywhere. It's not just at any particular place. It's the idea of like, hey, we're doing the right things. Like, no, there are people that are trusting in the Lord and there's people that are not. And that's it. And the Bible's pretty clear about that, right?
So I think, one thing I do want to note, though, I think it's important to note that denominations are actually not that important. Like the churches. Like if I've traveled a bunch and I go to Germany, used to go to Germany quite a bit, where the Reformation happened, almost no churches left.
Oh, wow.
You go to Turkey where Paul preached, almost no Christian churches left. Where all the churches were that you talked about earlier, where they got the letters, right? And so, but the church is growing.
It's just going to new places.
Yeah, or the denominations come and go, like they shrink and grow. And so it's not like it's not.
Is that just because people are so tribal?
I'm not sure.
Is that just human nature? It really bothers me. Like when people say to me, "Hey, what church do you go to?" and then want to know what denomination, I'm like, who cares?
What do you think about Jesus?
Well, no,
Jesus
even in the denomination we are in, or I don't be a little careful saying this because I don't study up big time on it, but like I know enough to know. There are churches that are definitely struggling and definitely probably like everywhere there's sin. So wherever there's a bunch of people getting together, there's going to be some serious problems, right? Yeah. And it's more like, hey, how are we dealing with it? How are we
being up with it?
Yeah.
I was actually talking to Mike Shooten from ARPA about it this week, about how in churches when there's, and this is any church, but where leaders can't sin, or there's a super high expectations on leaders not to sin and be perfect, and they're the example to everyone else, well, then no one's going to really be open about their sin. And if you're a leader and you're of sin, you're definitely not going to be open about it because you got to have it all together. And that, I mean, the whole point of the church is that it's not a museum for good people. It's a hospital for. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that episode and were blessed by it, would you be willing to support the show? That would help a lot in creating more content, improving the quality of the content, putting the production value, getting more guests on, and me being able to spend more time and energy towards it. So if you're interested in doing that, you can click up here and it'll take you to a support page. But you can also subscribe to the podcast by clicking over here and doing that. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.